Hello, everybody. Once again, I have the pleasure to speak with Jonathan Fink, one of the most knowledgeable and connected analysts on the topic. His YouTube channel is called Silicon Curtain. Everybody in the English audience will know this, I guess. But in Germany, many people must know it before, and so I hope that this will also help to make you more well known in Germany. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello there, Christoph. It's fantastic to see you.
Same. By the way, my name is Christoph Müller. I make videos for Ukraine and the support of democracy here on YouTube. And if you find this content informative, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. This is of enormous help to reach more people. Jonathan, I would like to ask you about the Davos Economic Forum. And Ukraine was supposed to be the topic, but now it seems to be completely put aside because of Trump's Greenland obsession. How do you see it?
This is, of course, by design, because the very process you described there of moving Ukraine off the agenda is one of the reasons why this idea of Greenland has been planted into Trump's head. Now, his obsession with it may be genuine, and it seems that that is being partly manipulated by the scenes by who knows. I mean, there will be specific figures there. But it's very much to force Ukraine off the agenda. I think it's very much intended to achieve a number of things. I mean, one is to distract Europe, to force Europe to stockpile air defense, and to think about, reserving some of its funds and resources for its own defense, and therefore. That starves Ukraine of that same material. Strategically, I think this is a continuation of the drone incursions we saw last year, because there are always several interpretations of these kind of events. One of the interpretations is this is Russia, building up to a major hybrid attack. Well, it could be, if it needs to do a major hybrid incursion, it's now run tests across multiple scenarios, including Berlin, where the power went out, I believe, over Christmas to about 100,000 residents of Berlin. The guilt has been placed, apparently, the accusation has been made that it's some eco-terrorist sort of extremist group. Well, of course it is, because Russia always works through proxies and front organizations. It works through criminal networks and individuals who are prepared to do anything for money. So you've got the hybrid thing there. The net effect of that, and this is where I think, studying what Russia does, it doesn't always make sense at the time. And you're like, it feels like chaos sometimes. But then when you kind of step back and you see what the net effect is, then you think, well, okay, that may be one of the reasons they did it. One of the net effects of those drone attacks in Europe last year was Europe hoarded or stockpiled its air defense and sent less to Ukraine. That then starts to make sense, because now we see the erosion, the destruction of Ukraine's energy infrastructure intentionally. Greenland, similarly, it's a massive distraction from supporting Ukraine while Putin fulfills his number one objective, which is to try to destroy Ukraine's resilience, destroy their resources, destroy their energy infrastructure, which not only impacts civilians and causes, well, it isn't causing it, but what he wants to cause is, the population to up sticks and move to Europe. That creates another problem. He wants basically a kind of ethnic cleansing, Ukraine without Ukrainians. And then suddenly this starts to make a little bit more sense. But of course, Trump has run away with the idea. It seems that he may actually try to do this invasion of Greenland, or maybe some kind of little green men hybridized kind of confrontation. Well, we're going to be distracted by this for quite a long time. And that then brings other benefits to Russia as well, which is the fracturing of the Western alliance. That is the fracturing of the US political system as well, turning it into absolute vitriol and turmoil. And that's one of his other goals, which is the destruction of NATO. And I can tell you, some are saying he's close. I've been saying for a while that NATO, as a broad alliance, I think has been dead for some time.
About NATO, this is you just mentioned a lot of things. I asked myself when you were telling that, planted this Greenland thing into his head. Who did it? How did they do it?
Well, this is interesting because I didn't know this, but I've been looking into this. This isn't a new idea. Putin isn't that inventive, and nor are his KGB goons. So this idea of Greenland, this debate around Greenland, this trying to stir up animosity between allies, actually goes back to the Soviet Union. This isn't the first time they've floated this idea. Now, of course, in past decades and during the Cold War and in the post-war period, the US was sensible enough to know that Denmark was one of their strongest allies in Europe. Per capita, the Danes lost more people in Afghanistan and Iraq than any other ally. That's if you relate that back to the sort of size of their military. They've always been there in the front row supporting the US. They have always been hawkish when it comes to defending Western freedom against, let's say, the Soviet Union, etc. And then when you go back to the Second World War, you can see there's a certain awareness of the danger. There's a certain gratitude. Because why is that? Well, because the Soviet Union actually wanted to take Denmark. There was this extraordinary race to take Denmark. Why? Because if you take Denmark, you control the Baltic Sea. Mm-hmm. So when the Allied troops are sweeping through Germany, racing to try to get to Berlin, there are several other races going on as well to define the new border of Europe. Stalin already, in his own mind, he already realized what he wanted, and that was to get his troops over as much of that territory as possible because it's finders keepers. And he wouldn't have cared what, system gets put in place in the West. He already knew what he was going to do in his territories, and that is to create puppet governments that he could control for a greater Soviet empire. He explicitly, and on several occasions, hinted at Denmark, and it seems they were trying to get there. And it was Churchill, I believe, Churchill's initiative that managed to persuade, I think it was a sort of US brigade, or was it the Brits? I need to look into the details. But we decided that we had to race and get into Denmark first. Can you even imagine the post-war history if Denmark had been under communist control, as Czechoslovakia was? We forget that the Czech Republic was, in the 1930s, an extremely advanced, liberal, highly technological, highly industrialized country, which then sort of disappeared under the Soviet Union. Well, Denmark could have experienced the same fate. It's almost impossible to imagine, but it was there. It means, Denmark has been at the forefront of the defense of Europe and American values. America knew they could get everything they wanted, and they still can. They could have as many bases as they want in Denmark by working through allies. They could have access to the minerals. Denmark's begged them to come in and set up your companies, do what you want. Great, just let our people live the way they want to live. And let's face it, the people living there might not necessarily think the Danish government has done everything it possibly can for them over the years, but they prefer their lifestyle. I mean, you see the interviews with people, none of them want to live an American lifestyle or have an American healthcare system or even get rich. That's not the culture and ethos of the people on Greenland. And so the whole idea is lunacy. Who put it into Trump's mind? Well, it's a Cold War psyop that's been sort of reheated. And one of the people who certainly has suggested this, and there's been apparently fake letters provided as well, injected into Trump's ecosystem. But one of them is an American sort of oligarch businessman figure who, guess what? Closely aligned with figures in the Kremlin. What a huge surprise. Well, it's not a surprise.
Yeah.
It really isn't.
I mean, maybe are you mentioning now Kirill Dmitriev, this guy?
It's not Kirill Dmitriev. No, there's no. I need to look the name up. There's an American businessman who has had dealings with various dodgy Russian figures, and he's a close confidant of Trump, and it seems that he's the one who really injected that idea recently into Trump's little fevered brain.
I mentioned just Dmitriev because I heard that in Davos now he's in the team before the summit, and he will instruct now again his cronies Witkov and Kushner, and then the King Trump can enter and has got the new instructions from the Kremlin. How?
Yeah.
Do you see it like that too?
Well, this is it. I mean, they know Trump. They've known him for decades since he visited Moscow. This is a good interview I did with Malcolm Nance, which is going up, and he makes the point that Ivanka Trump had links with KGB affiliates and likely provided reports on Trump's psychology and psychoses and various, character flaws going back decades and decades. They know how this guy ticks.
Money.
It's money. So, of course, their chief negotiator is also the Russian sort of, business minister. They absolutely have intentionally manipulate and use Trump by endlessly dangling the idea of business deals, very much flashy, status-driven ones where he can build in some kind of grift, it's so obvious, what they're doing there. It's a manipulation technique because, the media seems to fall for this trick all the time, but the ultimate purpose, of course, is to allow Putin to carry on with this war and to defeat Ukraine. He's still deluded probably into thinking he can do that.
He won't do it.
He won't. He's starting to realize the cost is getting high. This is the dangerous point of inflection as I see it, because once they've got the Western alliance fragmented, if Putin was to sit up one day and go, do you know what? This Ukraine, it's like a rock. We cannot go through it. We can't go over it. Right, we've got to go around it. What if he was to pause, or just suddenly, have an armed ceasefire on that border, and build, let's say, a giant wall around Ukraine, and then decide, okay, different tactics here. Let's take out everybody who is supporting Ukraine. Let's fix our numbers with, in terms of resources, in terms of needing more population for the army. Let's fix this before we go back and strike Ukraine again. Well, that's the point of real danger there.
Jonathan, this is exactly the thing I'm always fearing. Also, it proved to be much more difficult for Putin to fight Ukraine because they are really so brave. We see it since 4 years or since 12 years.
Yeah,
but it's much easier to just dissolve, as you described, the Western democratic allies of Ukraine, of democracy. We come back to it in a minute, because we are also going to talk about AfD.
We'll come on to that. But imagine just the scenario: you actually had a hot confrontation between Europe and the US in Greenland. It could be a siege, it could be a standoff. Again, talking to Malcolm Nance, he says the logistics would be insane to even mount a small operation. The US thinks it's this great and mighty military. But figure this, if you've pissed off every single Western ally, how are you going to get your flights and resources to Greenland, a territory which is 80% covered by an ice cap? How are you going to get your people there? How are you going to get your fuel there? As Malcolm Nance pointed out to me, the base that the US is still operating there, they're dependent on all their food and fuel by a local sort of Danish and Inuit team. Well, you don't even have to have a hot confrontation. You just have to sabotage their fuel tanks. And then they've got no heat and no electricity and no light. And they have to fly everything in. But they can't fly in via Europe because we'll shut their bases and we'll prevent them doing it. They can't fly over Canada because that airspace will be blocked to them. The logistics of them mounting an operation in Greenland in opposition to their allies is insane and doomed to fail. This would be Benghazi on absolute steroids. That would make it look like sort of a picnic, basically.
Wow. Yeah. Um, you mentioned NATO also, the dissolvement. What's the right word? To
Yeah, the
dissolve.
the dissolution, I guess, is the yeah.
The dissolution of NATO and the alliances here. This is the main goal of Putin, and this was always what I was fearing of, or being aware of, that Putin would try to attack a NATO country, and but now he's got the jackpot. He's got from within. He's got Donald Trump now, who is doing the job from within. And recently, I was just talking to General Ben Hodges, and he mentioned this word own goal. That was a really good thing, because if you're in a football match, the game the goal is to just to make a goal, make goals. And if you have a guy in your team who is shooting in your own goal, then this is the jackpot for the opposite team. And
No, and it's the worst. I mean, you hate that guy who does that. I mean, I remember at school, one of my friends scored 3 own goals, and
yeah,
I can tell you he was not popular.
but why is it so easy to make an own goal? Because the goal is not defended. You just turn around and shoot in the goal because nobody expects it. And that is Donald Trump inside NATO, inside the Western Alliance. He is killing the NATO from inside. This is, I think the Russians couldn't have better. They are cheering every day, I guess.
They're cheering, and here's the bit I think we tend to miss, and this is the worrying bit. Sensible chaps like you and me will look at this in, I would say, people who grew up in the era of newspapers, people who I would hope sort of rationalize a little bit and try to look beyond the headline of how we're being manipulated and who's doing what and who benefits from what. The trouble is a lot of people get their news now from social media. It's very easy to manipulate. So not everyone's going to react to these events the way we do. People are going to be scared. People are going to be manipulated. People are going to be getting narratives that put a different spin on these things. So not everyone's going to react like we do. Not everyone's going to say, look, we have to stand up to the US. And when the economic pressure, when the pain and the cost of standing up for values starts to rise, which it inevitably will, because there's going to be huge economic consequences to this, then there will be a lot of people who would rather give in and get their comfort or protect their comforts or get security even for their families. And of course, Russian information and psychological operations will also be prepared to leverage. This isn't just, the dumb show that we're seeing with Trump, roll out. There is going to be a huge psychological and political operation alongside it. And there are going to be many figures who see advantage, their own personal political advantage, in aligning with Kremlin narratives. Doesn't mean they're 100% they're an agent or an asset of the Kremlin, but they're willing to take resources and to co-opt narratives and utilize the situation for their own personal gain. And of course, we're living in a time of fairly fragile democracy. The generation who went into politics, who'd either been in the wake of World War II or actually participated in World War II, and were not prepared to sacrifice values for, gold baubles and whatever, and had some anchoring in values, that generation is completely gone. So we're living in a very, very fragile age. It's an ideal place for Russia to play its games. It knows that in our oppositional sort of political systems, where you have left and right and center, and where you have fragmentations of political views, it's very easy to set people against each other. It's very easy to manipulate that dynamic. All they have to do is to make the economic situation harder, the security situation more fragile, and this is the ideal playing ground for them. So whereas, yes, we have to resist Trump, we don't know whether that is going to reaffirm democracy and strengthen those parties that have genuine values and care about security, or whether it is actually going to play into the hands of populists who offer simplistic solutions and are prepared to align themselves with Kremlin narratives and undermine their own societies. I fear it will be more the latter as the pain starts to ramp up.
What do you suggest that we in the West, the democratic countries, that we strengthen our immune system, that we are not that fragmented anymore, and that we can focus again on the real threats?
Well, this is unfortunately radical. It's something that our politicians have failed to do.
Yeah.
Merz is talking the talk, so he's a little bit different now, which is good. Macron sometimes talks the talk, but what they have signally failed to do over the last 4 years, 5 years almost now, is to say Russia is at war with us.
Right.
We need to mobilize, and not mobilize as in, imposing, demands on the population. We need to somehow develop what Ukraine has naturally, and that is a strong civic society, a strong civic sense that defense and security involve all of us. We need to find some kind of way to say, yes, we need to mobilize, but we need to have a big part of that mobilization coming from society itself. Mobilize in a way that isn't just, the caricatured 1950s, people being drafted into the army because you have to. You're 18, you're going to be in the army for 2 years, we're going to steal 2 years of your life, and you're going to resent it and not explain to you why you have to do that. At least that's how people who did conscription in France described it to me. They just hated every minute of it. No, we have to do something that is far more inclusive. And that's going to be very, very difficult. We have to build our base of technologists and entrepreneurs and engineers so that we can actually assimilate this drone warfare and develop the kind of ecosystem. So something incredibly radical, I think, has to happen, which is a mobilization of society and very honest messaging by European leaders that put themselves on a war footing with Russia. That's not to say there's going to be big tank battles and whatever, and we're going to declare formal war. We have to say our land needs to be defended, our values need to be defended, and that is the job of everyone to do. I think that's the only way to actually counter extreme narratives, and it would be an inclusive, it would be a democratic process, but it's complex. I don't think our leaders have shown that they have the imagination to tackle these kind of things in the age we're living in, unfortunately.
Yeah, I saw not sometimes, all the time, I wish that our institutions, they have this clear sight, but we are infiltrated so much now by evil forces like the AfD or Nigel Farage or Le Pen and all those population, or not forget MAGA. All those guys in the United States, they are completely infiltrated by Russian propaganda via the internet, which is so easily spread around the world nowadays. And how to get rid of all that stuff. And I have this image in my head. It's like a cancer. It's like a body with some malignant cancer. And the only way to get rid of that is to extract it, to cut it out. So we cannot deal with cancer. We have to really cut it out. And that means when NATO is there, now for the moment, we have to cut out the USA, as bad as it is. It would.
Yes, I mean the other way is to starve it of the food that it needs. I mean the new techniques. I mean the traditional cancer technique is to bombard it with radiation, or as you say, surgically cut it out. They're developing techniques where you can actually cut the food supply to a tumor, and then it will start to shrink and shrivel. And I think that's probably the technique that we need to do here. One is follow the money. How are these extreme forces being sustained? What is the money and the resource? What are the connections they have to foreign forces, foreign influences, techniques developed overseas? But if you figure out the financial sources, I think that won't completely get rid of them, but many of them are sustained by sources that are outside of the country. Many of them are sustained by individuals with dubious sources of finance themselves and dubious links to outside players. We just have to reinforce the rules of our democracies, which are you can't have excessive investment in politics, keep money out of politics, really go after any covert funding of political parties and individuals, massively prosecute anyone who can be proven to have corrupt sources of income or to be using undeclared sources for digital advertising, etc., etc. We need to get oligarchy out of media. In this country with Farage, is the problem that Farage is an avowed fascist and populist? Well, that's a problem. The problem, though, is that people vote for it. The problem is that he has a base of support. The problem is that politicians and almost certainly the intelligence services know about the illicit sources of finance over the years and refuse to prosecute. So I think even if we just did the basics, that is a start. Use the law to go after people on any political persuasion who do not play by the rules, and that at least will be a decent start. One of the reasons we have Trump is because the US system has, let's say, undue deference to money. Money seems to create a kind of aristocracy or hierarchy in the US, which makes people immune from the rule of law. And Trump has shown that over and over and over again, that he has that aura of Teflon untouchability. No, you prosecute him and his minions in the same way that you would prosecute anybody else and those who are not moneyed. And again, just upholding the law, you start to make some serious inroads into this. Wouldn't cure all the problems. France showed this with Le Pen. They prosecuted for some, I think it was an electoral electoral technicalities and funding, etc. Just show you're willing to enforce the law evenly over everybody and rigorously, and we can make a start there and re-establish trust in law and due process, but also tackle foreign influence. So you say get the US out. What is more important, though? Is it to push, US military and bases out, which could actually make you vulnerable, or is the first priority to push out X and all these sources of weaponized media? Is the first priority to say to the social media platforms, enough with the free speech bullshit? What you're doing is weaponizing speech for money, for clicks. You're manipulating people through algorithms. This is not free speech at all. Fine, operate your business models in Europe, but you are not allowed to harvest people's attention for money, call it free speech, and then invest in figures who are going to sort of defend you and manipulate reality. So I think actually tackling the digital ecosystem is maybe one of the things we could do as Europe, which would hit the US absolutely hardest. And it would get right to the heart of not just the problem, but the key oligarchic figures who are warping our reality to line their own pockets.
Yeah, we have also a lot of very strong means to punish the Americans, the oligarchy, and keyword taxes, because this is so insane. The Europeans just a while ago, they agreed to a very uncomfortable tax agreement with 15% we have to pay, but the Americans don't have to pay anything. But now they are carrying on with the so-called trade bazooka that they about it, and there we also really could get the oligarchs. But I still think that it is also necessary to create an organization. I mean, this is maybe more difficult to create a whole organization, but to create a real democratic organization worldwide. I think Jake Bro mentioned this in some of his podcasts, to make a real democratic defense alliance.
Yes, absolutely. With Canada, South Korea, Japan,
absolutely.
Europe, and Australia. Let's never forget Australia, New Zealand.
Yes.
There are plenty of territories who should form a trade alliance. That is something actually I was talking about in the first year of the war, because after Brexit, it seems to me, and we partly, benefited from it, but we haven't fully and consciously. This war that Russia has declared, not just on Ukraine, but on civilized democratic values, systems, institutions, this would have been the perfect opportunity for Britain to really accelerate its re-engagement with Europe. Now, Keir Starmer's doing it, but he's doing it in a way that is, he's trying to not, just do it under here so that no one sees. No,
not to hurt anybody.
Overt. Yeah, it should have been overt.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say hurt anybody. I mean, he's doing it in a particularly cowardly and sort of slightly sneaky way, which isn't going to get people. No, you should do it really overt, right? The world has changed. We're going to massively benefit from this. We are re-engaging. We're becoming part of the single market. We're joining the defense alliance or defense procurement process across Europe. We're going to rearm, and Britain's going to become the arsenal of Europe. There are so many ways in which we could have shown leadership, which would have undone some of the damage done by Brexit. But we've been doing that only very, very slowly. I mean, it's partially helped. It's partially pulled people together and made them see, the bigger advantage in working together. But we've really missed a huge, huge trick here. And now with the massive rearmament, again, thanks to Trump, people are moving away from, American procurement of American systems. We're looking to develop our own satellite data. We need more of our own indigenous fighters, fighter jets, and all this kind of stuff. Britain again is perhaps losing out big time by not really jumping in and, as I say, forming not just a sort of trade alliance or an organization that unites democracies, but also a defense production and procurement sort of network.
Britons are not the only ones who lose time. We really need a leader, as you mentioned. The last time it was Winston Churchill, where the real leader came from your country, and in our country it was Konrad Adenauer, the first chancellor of Germany, who after the Second World War, who had such incredible leadership qualities, and then it was deterring. But those figures had always the very big impact from the outside, called wars. And they had the personal experience of horrible problems. So where should a leader nowadays in Europe, where should he come from? And I have one in mind. What would be your suggestion?
We still largely have this generation of people who were brought up in soft times, the end of history times.
Yes.
People who are very managerial, who I think one of Britain's big problems, certainly since Cameron, is simple lack of leadership, lack of imagination, just pure lack of imagination.
Yeah.
Even when they weren't necessarily, the worst people, it's just a total lack of vision of where they want to take the country, or a real understanding of how things work. And we can see that in government after government, where our energy independence was reduced to save money. Our army and strength was reduced to save money. None of them are thinking strategically. And if they are thinking strategically, they're not thinking about security. We always talk about sort of German energy system consciously becoming dependent on Russia, which Merz has now said is a huge mistake. He's also said that the denuclearization of Germany was a huge mistake. And both these moves only benefited Russia because it created a dependency for German industry on cheap cheap Russian energy, which was thought of as dependable, thought of as the best way to democratize Russia. Whereas what it was doing was building them up an arsenal with which to attack us. So there is this extraordinary kind of naivety there, which we have to now get beyond. Unfortunately, I still see an extraordinary lack of imagination, even in those who are starting to wake up to the problem. There's a failure of imagination to tackle the problems, which, as you say, in the Second World War, I mean, maybe our leaders weren't perfect then, and Churchill was a complex figure. He's adored in certain quarters, and I think he's a prodigiously intelligent character. He had the ability to, not feel threatened by people who are more capable, intelligent than himself. And he points them to roles, and all sorts of invention happens because he's got the leadership characteristics to allow innovation to flourish, and that will lead to mistakes. And actually being able to tolerate high risk and power through massive mistakes that inevitably comes with taking risk, I think is a sign of extraordinary leadership. Well, most of our leaders now are entirely risk averse. One of the problems in Ukraine is that many in the bureaucracy are risk averse.
Even nowadays.
Yeah, it's civic society that's taken many of the risks and investments that has allowed Ukraine to become the innovation powerhouse that it is. That's not coming from central government. So, it's worth understanding that our leaders, we have a deficit of imagination. And I think imagination and leadership are two sides of the same coin. We have to figure out how to elevate people who have these qualities into government.
Yeah.
That for me means getting more people from commercial environments.
But what I always
politics.
what I always notice is that those figures in the dictatorships like Putin or now Trump, others also they are not risk averse. In the opposite, they take the biggest risks and they always win. They seem to have no limits. They can go on. They always get what they put everything on one number and then the number falls exactly on that one and they won again. This is weird.
Yeah. I mean, it's because they're expanding into a vacuum. As you say, yes, they don't have the same constraints. They definitely don't have the same constraints. They are acting a little bit more like entrepreneurs. I mean, many of the entrepreneurs I've met in my life, some are extraordinarily talented, and especially if they come from software engineering backgrounds, they're building their businesses in a fully intentional way, and they're impressive people. I've also met many entrepreneurs who really, I'm afraid, are not at all smart. Some who are really not at all nice. But they have a particular mechanic, which is to be pushing continuously. They'll steal ideas from other people. They don't necessarily have the brains to understand if this is a good idea or this is a terrible idea. They'll just push on everything all the time. And if, one or two ideas out of 10 make a bunch of money, then overall they're up. I see Trump as a little bit like that. He can't distinguish a good idea from a bad idea. He has no understanding mostly of what he's doing, but he will push and push and push, and he has this, desire to be acquisitive, and that kind of method will expand into a vacuum, and sometimes it will, for every 8 disastrous mistakes, it will have maybe 1 or 2 things that make a lot of money, which make up for all of the mistakes. But if you allow that to expand a vacuum, if there's nothing to resist it, nothing to press back and say, stop, this is a stupid idea, you're a moron, and we're not going to let you continue anymore. Because I think business is not like politics, and it should not be like politics. The fact that these, let's say, dark entrepreneurs of political ideas are able to expand tells us something about the unhealthy environment in which they're doing so. In business, that's fine because you have lots of competing ideas and whatever. There's a lot of business people out there. But when it comes to politics, those same characteristics start to become, as you say, it's like some kind of tumor growing, and no one's cutting off the food supply to it. So that's the first thing we should do.
So if you mention this behavior. Let's focus on Trump once again. If you take this behavior, which is so completely insane and or narcissistic and childish, for example, that he writes to the president of Norway that he doesn't get the Nobel Peace Prize, and that's why, as if it would have been the fault of the president of Norway himself. No, it was the Nobel Peace Prize committee, but Trump doesn't get it. So such a stupid behavior. But the fact that we allow things like that to happen, that means that our system has also to be remodeled, and we have to improve it here, better now than later when it's too late. So again, how can we change this system now to make it new? That stupidities like the one from
question,
Trump, they cannot continue, because this will inevitably lead to the completely disaster.
It will, but unfortunately, it takes time. And in this case, it's not a given that we will return to what we call normal politics.
No, I don't want
normal security order, but it's.
I don't want to return. But do we just have the Third World War, and then if we hopefully survive, then we can make it new without those mistakes before? Isn't there any way to remodel it before? Because everything is, for example, let's take the European Union. There is this stupid veto. It's also inside the NATO. Everybody has to agree on it, and if only one member gets away from the UN Security Council, for example, it is paralyzed. So to make this rule new, it's just impossible, because
there's two big problems here. One's which we do not have a solution to. Let's admit it. One is that you have Russia, who has been, I call it, Russia is the arsonist of world politics, always pouring fuel on every fire, and setting new fires wherever it can.
Yes.
Until Russia collapses as the last land-based European empire, it's an anachronism from history. And Russia is one of the main accelerants of chaos in the world, not the only one, but it is a main one. I think when that empire crumbles and disintegrates, which is an inevitability, whether it happens next month or next year or in 10 years or in 50 years, its decline is, and fragmentation is inevitable, because it just is not a sustainable business model for any country.
Of course not.
Especially when hydrocarbons run out. It's demographics, it's use of resource, it's inequality, it's inefficiency, and its sheer brutishness mean that it's not sustainable for the long term. When Russia disappears as an empire, then I think we'll find that a lot of problems just disappear magically overnight, but also a new way of cooperating between people can emerge. But we have the other problem, which is the US, which has also got a systemic kind of problem. I mean, all these problems, I think, can be cured by more democracy rather than less. So we need to lean in rather than, being protective and saying, well, democracy is broken, it can never work. No, more democracy is the solution to all of these things, and strong alliances between democracies. So we need to keep working at that and retelling the stories about why democracy is important. And I think the systems such as the US and Britain as well, even at some point need to go down, and they need to innovate their political systems to move away from the confrontational left versus right bicameral kind of chambers. We need to have a multi-party system to reflect I would say the multiplicity of views that exist, because we can't remodel it. We can't ban everything. We can't and shouldn't ban the extremes of the left and the right, but
we
need to have more of a coalition type culture and mentality, which many in Europe have.
What we could do, for example, would we could, as you when you mentioned now that the Soviet Empire will inevitably crumble, and I also think that, and what we can do is to put ourselves into this position of the fathers of the Constitution. Somebody, I'm not an advocate, but we could continue. We also together could work on that. How should a society, how should a democratic model have to look like, that things like nowadays cannot happen anymore? We must write down all those issues and make a constitution for the future. That would my positive suggestion to end this interview now, because we surpassed the time.
We're coming to the end. We're coming to the end, aren't
yes,
we?
I get.
But, you know, there's a problem in Germany as well. I mean, we have problems everywhere. We have Farage, we have AfD, we have Le Pen. The result of not trusting electorates, the result of weaponized social media, the result of politicians being disingenuous and failing to deal with problems and not trusting their electorates is the rise of populism. And I wanted to quickly ask you, in the last sort of 2 minutes, what the threat from AfD is. What's the realistic threat coming up? Would you see an AfD chancellor, or is it more at a local government level?
I mean, that is the real threat coming from the AfD is exactly as you described it. It comes from the local level, and then they would enter into the Länder. Like, I hate to say this now, but they have chances to come into the government, and this would be really the end of our democracy, just as it was the end of Germany when Adolf Hitler came into the power, or as it would be also the end of democracy when Donald Trump came into the power of the United States. This is so dangerous, and I wonder how this can happen, that they rise and rise and rise. I would like to make a special one about AfD. And I have been talking also recently to a disinformation expert, Susanne Spahn. Haven't published that yet, but I'm working on it also because it has to get out quick. It was very interesting what she said. And the AfD is a main problem, and they are financed and pushed by the Russians. That's true. There are a lot of proofs for that.
You can see their narratives. I mean, when you look at and break down the narratives that people use, it's quite clear that there's some alignment, strong alignment there.
Let me just quickly share this picture here. You see here AfD chief Tino Kupala with the ambassador of Russia, and that was for the celebration of the defeat of Nazi Germany. Also Gerhard Schröder was on this event, and so
of course he was. Yes,
sure. And that's why here you have really the Kremlin puppets in the German society, and the voter base is very strong. They got about 40% now, more, or 42 even, more than CDU in
That's
some
terrifying.
countries. It's
let's maybe do a special event on this, and maybe we could get some experts who are fluent in English and record a special episode on this and what the implications would be for the defense industry, for Ukraine, for the European Union, for the Democratic Alliance resisting Russian aggression. I think yes, this deserves its own episode. Let's plan that and get yourself and some experts on, as you say, maybe disinformation, but also AfD politics, and let's record something special, because I think the audience are clamoring to understand.
That's very
today. Yeah,
so all the best.
It's a real
Jonathan.
pleasure speaking again today, though.
Absolutely, and have a good trip to Ukraine. I wish you, and all the best. Thanks a lot for talking to me today, Jonathan. All the best.
Real
Bye.
pleasure. Thank you.